Wargaming goes back a long time.
We have lots of games which kind of look like conflict. You have games that the Vikings had created that seem to have pieces that represent soldiers.
We know that people for centuries have been playing games which relate to war. Chess, for example. Children, of course, for generations have been playing with toy soldiers, but miniature representations of troops, of chariots, of cavalry exist all the way back to ancient times. We know very little about the rules that they were using, if any.
Particularly in the military, but in other fields too. We've seen the use of games for people to practice, to learn strategies or tactics, or other kinds of things, to learn procedures in hospitals, to learn how to deal with humanitarian disaster.
I think the relationship between recreational gaming and professional gaming, using this particularly for the military and defense, has been a symbiotic and synergistic one.
The chicken and egg question of military and recreational gaming influencing the other and which one comes first, I think we have to go back to 1812 and Kriegspiel.
Kriegspiel.
They modeled mobility, terrain, firing effects.
That war game, that tabletop game that became the military standard, came out of recreational gaming. It came out of an attempt to create a realistic tabletop game that German aristocrats would be playing amongst themselves. A lot of those people were also heavily involved in the military. So you have a situation where both of them are appearing side by side. The divide between the military and the civilian is very blurred.
In 1913, H.G. Wells created a game called Little Wars, which is pretty much just toy soldiers now.
A floor game with toy soldiers using miniature cannon to fire matchsticks to shoot them down. But the key thing is that this was an adult playing with these toy soldiers, and he was doing so according to a set of rules. And that really started people exploring ways in which they could model war as a game, not just as a means of training if they're in the army, but actually as a means of entertainment. You are recreating battles of the past which have happened. You can't change that. You're just modeling them and refighting them. And it wasn't long in the 1970s before people realized that you didn't need to stick to history at all.
Gary Gygax made a game called Chainmail, and Chainmail was medieval miniatures essentially. After that, he decided, you know, it'd be cool, let's add some dragons, wizards.
Very soon, we've got the massive phenomenon of Dungeons and Dragons, this role-playing game. What had previously been a fairly niche hobby of miniature wargaming of historical battles flowered into this Warhammer universe.
In the mindset of a Warhammer player, you gotta think, okay, I gotta win this game. I gotta hold these objectives on the battlefield most of the time. What can I use as an expendable force? What can I not use as an expendable force and hold back? What is my enemy thinking about? Are they gonna have cavalry on the left flank or the right flank? Are they gonna come for a full-face charge? And what can I do to make my enemy slip up at some point?
Really excellent example of the serious use of games was the work done by the Western Approach's tactical unit in Liverpool during World War II. And this was an analytical unit attached to the Royal Navy that was trying to work out anti-submarine tactics. It had a few male officers, but it was largely a unit of female naval volunteers. In fact, one of the interesting things is some of the most important gaming in all of human history was predominantly done by women. These women were very young. Some were as young as 17. They didn't have naval experience either. And what they did is they worked out on the floor with little models and chalk drawings and a set of wargaming rules how it was that German U-boats were attacking Allied convoys. Admiral Max Horton, who was at that time the British admiral in charge of the convoy operations, the Western Approaches as they were called, came up to find out what the hell this unit was doing, and he wanted an explanation because he was all ready to close them down. And they said, well, why don't you actually play the war game? And Max Horton was a very decorated, very experienced World War I British submarine commander.
And he was comprehensively beaten, and he came out from behind the screen and said, I want the person who was commanding that escort vessel to be out in the North Atlantic in 2 weeks' time commanding a real escort vessel. And a 23-year-old female lieutenant stepped forward and said, do you really mean that, sir?
And those tactics were absolutely essential to the Battle of the Atlantic. They saved thousands and thousands of lives, and really some of the best anti-submarine warfare tactical innovations of World War II came from a gaming floor.
The Cold War is a very interesting period because it was intensely dangerous for so long. What somebody is experiencing in London in 1940, 1941 is war. What somebody in London is experiencing in 1967, 68, 1985 perhaps feels rather further away from that conflict. But it is this unique fear, I think, and the understanding that things could go wrong very, very quickly.
The threat of nuclear war, you could just taste it in the air. My name's Tony Temple. I buy and restore classic arcade games. My whole involvement in this mad hobby started when I played Missile Command as a youngster. In 2006, I broke the world record.
One of the very important developments in using games to understand the real world was game theory. Now, game theory was particularly applied in the aftermath of the Second World War when nuclear weapons were coming to dominate strategy.
It is essentially a series of decisions, a series of choices with specific outcomes, and to try and understand and quantify international relations.
Game theory was all about non-zero-sum situations. What that means is that unlike in the total wars of the early 20th century where one side wins, the other side loses, with nuclear weapons, each side has the common interest of survival. And in that context, games were developed, famous one of the Prisoner's Dilemma or Chicken, where two youngsters are driving towards one another at night in American highway, trying to show that they are braver than the other and will swerve later. But of course, the common interest is avoiding the worst outcome in the case of Chicken, that they smash into each other and kill one another.
If they fire first, they will also be annihilated. Because if you destroy all of my missiles, then there's nothing to stop you making that launch. Why would you not do it? Because there's not going to be any harm to you. I've got nothing left to hurt you with. So gaming that was really, really important by both sides to understand what they could achieve through their first strike and what the second strike would then look like after that.
What's interesting about Missile Command is it's not offensive. So we think about war simulators today, you're very much on the offensive. You know, you've got your gun, you've got to go out and you're basically killing everybody. Missile Command is completely different in that you're not actually killing anything, you're not blowing anything up. You're looking to intercept missiles that are coming down onto your cities, and you're looking to protect those cities. And you know, clearly the message within the game is there are no winners in nuclear war, because at some point your game is going to end. There is no way to beat Missile Command. There is no way to win at Missile Command. There's no end to the game. Then it's really about how long can you keep your cities alive.
Games were used to codify that and to explore those situations with which we're now very familiar in the nuclear age, of competition within a framework of the common interest of avoiding disaster. Well-designed games can capture that mix of collaboration and competition and can allow people to work together as well as to work in antagonism with one another in order to achieve their goals.
Every time there's a change in international circumstances or a change in the nature of warfare, wargaming changes. So with the Cold War, you have computer programs that are trying to model how military formations might fight each other. What we have seen in the last 5 to 10 years, though, is the real resurgence of manual gaming, of board gaming. But that has also had consequences in the serious gaming field, where I think people have recognized that both techniques have strengths and weaknesses.
I'm a student studying psychology and sociology at McGill, and we're currently just beside McGill University playing the Apocalypse North mega game.
Essentially, it's like a refugee crisis spilling from the United States going upwards to Canada, where there's been a zombie outbreak. And so not only are zombies coming in, but American refugees are also coming in. So it's causing a lot of havoc.
The traffic accident along this highway, along the 401 is getting worse and worse. Now it's hitting Vaudreuil-Dorion. We got people injured, we have casualties down.
It's like 100 people each trying to do their own thing, and these are all happening simultaneously.
But I'm really interested in both international affairs as well as public policy, and engaging in this is teaching me a lot of lessons about bureaucracy, especially, and how hard it is.
It's responding to a lot of things at once while being able to express yourself clearly and negotiate to fulfill your objectives.
But even things we might not think of as very serious games have potential serious game applications. So let's take Dungeons & Dragons or other role-playing games. You might think nothing could be further removed from national security gaming or gaming in the humanitarian sector or the medical sector and playing D&D. But D&D is about creating a narrative universe. It's about leading people through that. It's about presenting them with choices. It's about presenting them with challenges. Those are D&D techniques.
Quite a proportion, in fact the majority I would suggest, of professional wargamers, especially those civilian defense analysts, but also quite a lot of military officers, play recreational war games in their spare time. And the spare time that they spend on the recreational gaming informs their ideas of how to simulate, what sort of game mechanisms to use.
Here at McGill University, we hold the annual Connections North Conference, which is a professional wargaming conference. Academics, people from the national security establishment, students, hobby gamers.
My name is Robin Lobb. I did work running a project, CIA project called Urban Flashpoints. It was pretty fascinating and really relates to what we're looking at today in the games we're doing here. Dungeons & Dragons definitely influenced my work, definitely influenced my career and my life.
My name is Scott Roach. I'm a professional Army officer. I work in the Canadian Defence Force and I play miniature tabletop historical wargaming.
In a very direct way, D&D has led me to absolutely travel the world, fortunately paid for by someone else, as I've used a lot of those skills in developing real games on serious matters, in intel analysis, crime analysis and prevention, money laundering, for organizations like the World Bank, the Egmont Group.
War games of all kinds have this great benefit. Nobody really dies, and you can try things out and make terrible mistakes, but nothing has really been lost, and you learn a lesson for the future when it might matter a lot more.